I had carried flowers and Paris flight tickets into the office to surprise my husband for Valentine's Day, only to discover the entire company celebrating his engagement to the female CEO. My husband kissed her, then raised a diamond ring as the crowd roared its approval. I turned and walked out. Within minutes, I had canceled the trip, frozen every joint account we shared, and pulled my 83% stake from the company worth $558 million out entirely. Half an hour later, my phone displayed 152 missed calls. Then the doorbell rang. I didn't open it right away. I stood in the hallway of our house in Westport, Connecticut, coat still on, purse still slung over my shoulder, the wilting Valentine's roses resting on the kitchen island behind me. They'd been wrapped in heavy cream paper tied with a red satin ribbon, the kind of old-fashioned, overdone bouquet Jake always claimed he loved because it made him feel classic. I'd bought them that morning from a small flower shop near the train station, along with a card I'd written by hand, because after 14 years of marriage, I still believed love deserved effort. The Paris tickets were tucked inside that card, first class, departing Friday evening, 4 nights at a small hotel near the Seine, the same neighborhood where Jake and I had honeymooned before his suits turned custom-tailored, before his name started appearing in business magazines, before people straightened their posture the moment he walked into a room. That morning, I had pictured his face lighting up at the surprise. By noon, I'd watched that same face pressed against another woman's lips. The doorbell rang again, longer this time. Then Jake's voice came through the heavy front door, muffled but unmistakable. "Emma, please open the door." I looked at my phone. Another call lit up the screen with a photo I'd never bothered to change. Jake in a navy sweater, smiling at me from the deck of our first house, before the gray crept into his temples, before the expensive watch, before ambition curdled into entitlement. I let it ring. "Emma, I know you're in there," he said, his voice fracturing. "Please, just talk to me." It was strange how small that word sounded after what I'd just witnessed. At 11:42 that morning, I'd walked into the lobby of Harlow Reed Technologies, carrying a bouquet in one hand and a slim black envelope in the other. The building was glass and sunlight, polished concrete, living walls of green, a reception desk that looked more like a boutique hotel's than a corporate headquarters. I hadn't visited often in recent years, partly because I valued my privacy, partly because Jake had spent years quietly teaching everyone to think of the company as his alone, not ours. Still, I expected a flicker of recognition. Maybe not from the new receptionist with her sharp eyeliner and headset, but surely from someone in operations or finance, someone who remembered when the whole company was 12 people crammed into a rented office above a dental clinic in Stamford. Instead, the receptionist barely glanced up. "Are you here for the celebration?" she asked brightly. I smiled, assuming Jake had arranged some Valentine's gathering for the staff. He was skilled at that sort of thing, the visible gestures, the champagne, the rehearsed speeches. "I suppose I am," I said. She gestured toward the atrium. "They're just getting started." I heard the applause before I saw the crowd. Roughly 200 employees had gathered beneath the skylight, clustered around a small stage decked out in white roses and gold balloons. A violinist had been brought in, someone else filmed on a phone. The company logo glowed behind the platform, and standing beneath it was Amanda Blake, the new CEO Jake had hired 18 months earlier. I'd met her once at a charity dinner. Brilliant, polished, nearly a decade younger than me, with a sharp blonde bob and the kind of quiet confidence people mistake for beauty when it's really competence. Jake stood beside her, wearing that practiced public smile, one hand resting on his jacket button as though he'd been born under a spotlight. Then he dropped to one knee. The room erupted. For a full second, my mind refused to translate what my eyes were showing me. I thought maybe it was a stunt, some elaborate office joke, a morale exercise gone theatrical. But then Amanda pressed both hands to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes, and Jake opened a velvet box. The diamond caught the light, the exact cut I'd once told him I adored. The crowd cheered as Amanda nodded. Jake slid the ring onto her finger, then rose, cupped her face, and kissed her. Not a nervous kiss. Not an accident. A man doesn't kiss another woman like that unless he's already rehearsed betraying his wife in his mind 1,000 times. The bouquet slipped lower in my grip. A woman beside me whispered, "Can you believe it? They're perfect together." Perfect. That was the word that finally turned Jake's head. His eyes locked on mine across the atrium, and for half a second, the noise in the room seemed to fold in on itself. His smile disappeared. His color drained. He knew I'd seen everything, and still he didn't come to me. Didn't say my name. Didn't step off that stage. Amanda followed his gaze and looked at me with polite confusion, the expression a hostess gives a guest she can't quite place. "I'm sorry," she mouthed, almost kindly. "Do we know each other?" That was the moment I understood. Jake hadn't just cheated. He had erased me. I turned and walked back through the lobby before my dignity could bleed out in front of strangers. No one stopped me. The receptionist smiled again, oblivious and cheerful. "Have a great Valentine's Day," she chirped. I made it to the parking garage before my hands began to shake. I sat in the car with the flowers on the passenger seat and the Paris envelope in my lap, listening to the faint echo of applause still ringing in my ears. I could have screamed. I could have stormed back inside. I could have hurled those roses at his face in front of the whole company and handed everyone the spectacle they were already half enjoying. But rage, once it turns cold enough, goes quiet. I opened my phone. First I canceled Paris. Then I called the bank and froze every joint account requiring mutual authorization under our marital agreement. Then I called our attorney, Martin Keller, who had been my father's lawyer before he became mine. "Emma," he said, alarmed by my tone. "What happened?" "My husband just got engaged," I told him, "to his CEO." A silence stretched so complete I could hear him breathing. "I'm on my way to the office," he finally said. "No," I answered. "Start with the holding company." Another pause. "Are you certain?" I stared through the windshield at the elevator doors, half expecting Jake to burst through them, breathless with apology. He never came. "Yes," I said. "Withdraw the full position, Emma," Martin said carefully. "That triggers a capital event. It will freeze their credit line. It may collapse the pending acquisition." "Do it," I said, pressing my thumb into the edge of the Paris envelope until it cut my skin. By the time I drove home, the calls had started, then 15, then 50. By the time I reached the house, Jake had called 152 times, and now he stood on our porch, pressing the doorbell like a man trying to raise the dead. "Emma," he said again. "Please, I can explain." I walked to the door slowly and looked through the side window. He still wore the same suit, tie askew now, hair disheveled, face damp with sweat despite the February chill. Behind him, his company car sat crooked in the driveway, as if he'd abandoned it before it had fully stopped. For the first time all day, Jake looked like a man realizing that consequences could outrun excuses. I opened the door halfway. His eyes dropped to my face, then to my coat, then past me toward the kitchen, where the flowers sat like evidence. "Emma," he whispered. It wasn't what it looked like. I studied him, and for one strange, almost comic moment, I realized he still believed the betrayal was the whole problem. He had no idea the empire behind him was already on fire. "Then tell me," I said calmly, "what exactly did it look like?" His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Behind him, his phone rang again, not mine, his. He glanced at the screen, and whatever name appeared there emptied the color from his face. I knew before he said it. The board had found out. Jake looked at his phone, and the color drained from his face so fast it was almost satisfying to watch, not in the loud, cruel way people imagine revenge feels, but quietly, the way a locked door feels satisfying after years of someone walking through it uninvited. "Emma," he said, stepping closer. "We need to talk inside." "No," I said. His eyes flicked toward the street. Our neighbors' houses sat behind bare maple trees, porch lights glowing against the gray Valentine's evening. Westport was the kind of town where people pretended not to notice things while noticing everything, and Jake knew that better than anyone. He'd spent years cultivating the image of the generous husband, the visionary founder, the man who remembered birthdays and sent Christmas baskets to people he barely tolerated. Being seen begging on my porch didn't fit the brand. "Please," he said, lowering his voice, "I made a mistake." A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, I said. A mistake is missing a flight. You proposed to another woman in front of 200 employees. His jaw tightened. It got out of hand. I nearly laughed. That was Jake's gift, and maybe his curse. He could make any disaster sound like weather, something that rolled in unexpectedly. A storm, never a choice. When did it get out of hand? I asked. Before or after the ring? He swallowed. Behind him, his phone buzzed again. This time he glanced at it and turned the screen away, but I'd already seen enough. Martin Keller, my lawyer. Jake saw that I'd seen. What did you do? He whispered. I leaned against the doorframe, and for the first time since walking into that glass atrium, my hands stopped trembling. I protected what belongs to me. His expression shifted, panic sharpening into calculation, an expression I recognized from years of watching him across conference tables whenever a deal began slipping from his control. Emma, you can't just pull capital like that, he said. There are procedures. There are obligations. There are clauses, I corrected, and you signed them. He stared at me as though I'd spoken in a language he once understood but had forgotten through sheer arrogance. 14 years earlier, when Harlow Reed was nothing but a half-built software platform, a folding table, and a name scrawled on a legal pad at 2 a.m, Jake hadn't talked about obligations. He'd talked about dreams, about building something that made hospital systems safer, that helped doctors track critical patient data faster, that kept small clinics from drowning in outdated software. He had the charisma, and I had the architecture. He could sell a room, and I could build the thing he sold. We were a good team once. That's the part people never understand about betrayal. It doesn't always begin with a villain and a victim. Sometimes it begins with two exhausted people eating takeout on the floor of a rented office, laughing because the Wi-Fi had died again. Sometimes the person who destroys you is the same person who once believed in you when no one else did. My father had been the first investor, not because he trusted Jake, but because he trusted me. After he died, his shares passed into a family holding company, and over the years, through funding rounds, buybacks, and carefully structured agreements, that holding company came to control 83% of Harlow Reed. Jake knew this, of course. He'd known it when he asked me to stay out of any public-facing role because, as he put it, investors felt more comfortable with a single operational voice. He'd known it when he convinced me my privacy was an advantage, that I could shape strategy from the board level while he handled interviews and champagne toasts. He'd known it every time a magazine crowned him the founder, and I said nothing, telling myself marriage wasn't a competition. But knowing a fact and respecting it are two very different things. You're angry, he said, softening his voice deliberately. I understand that. You have every right to be. No, I said. I had every right to know my husband was living as an unmarried man at work. He flinched. Amanda didn't know, he added quickly. That caught me off guard, though I didn't let it show. Didn't know what? He looked toward the driveway, then back at me. About us? Not really. Not really, I repeated. I told her we were separated. The cold moved through me, clean and precise. I thought of Amanda's polite, bewildered smile, the way she'd mouthed, "Do we know each other?" Not cruelly, not smugly, just genuinely unaware that the woman clutching Valentine's roses was the wife of the man she'd just agreed to marry. You told her we were separated, I said, while you slept in my bed every night. Jake closed his eyes. Emma. While I hosted your mother for Thanksgiving. I know. While we renewed the lake house insurance together last month. I know. While you kissed me goodbye this morning. His eyes opened, and for a moment I saw the man from the early days, the one who hated disappointing me. Then fear swallowed him whole again. The board is overreacting, he said. This can be managed. There it was, not repaired, managed. I stepped back and lifted the black envelope off the console table. I'd carried it in from the car without even thinking, and now I held it between two fingers. These were for Paris, I said. His eyes dropped to it. Something like grief crossed his face, but far too late to matter. I wanted to surprise you, I said. I thought we needed a few days away. I thought the distance was the acquisition, the stress. Everything you always said was temporary. It was complicated, he said. No, software integration is complicated. Marriage is difficult. Lying is simple. He looked at me, wounded by the plainness of it. Another car turned onto the street. Jake instinctively edged closer to the door, trying to slip out of the headlights. I didn't move. The lights passed. His phone buzzed again, then mine. I glanced down and saw a message from Martin. Emergency board meeting scheduled for 7:30 p.m. They're requesting your presence by video. Do not discuss corporate matters with Jake. I turned my phone just long enough for him to catch the first line. His mouth parted. Emma, don't do this tonight. I didn't do it tonight, I said. You did. He dragged a hand through his hair, and suddenly he looked older than 46, not distinguished, just exhausted and cornered. If I'm removed, the company destabilizes, he said. People lose jobs. Good people. Families, mortgages. That's the first honest thing you've said all day, I replied. And it should have mattered to you before you turned their workplace into your engagement party. He had no answer. For years, Jake had relied on motion. When a conversation grew uncomfortable, he walked into another room. When a question cut too close, he took a call. When I asked about loneliness, he blamed deadlines. But now he stood on a porch with nowhere left to go, and the life he'd carefully divided into separate rooms had finally collapsed into one house. Does Amanda know now? I asked. His silence was the answer. I nodded. Then go explain it to her. Emma, please. I began closing the door. He reached out, not touching me, just close enough that I saw his hand tremble. Are you divorcing me? I paused. The word should have felt dramatic. Instead, it felt administrative, like naming a document already drafted by years of small humiliations I'd chosen never to count. Yes, I said. His face crumpled, but only for a second, before fear reasserted itself. And the company? I looked at him through the narrowing gap. The company, I said, was never yours. Then I shut the door, locked it, and stood there while he knocked once, twice, then stopped. A minute later, his car door slammed. Through the window, I watched him sit behind the wheel without starting the engine, shoulders bowed, phone pressed to his ear. I didn't know if he was calling Amanda, the board, or another lawyer. For the first time in 14 years, I didn't need to know. At 7:30, I sat at my kitchen table in a navy sweater, a glass of water beside me, Martin's face glowing on my laptop screen. One by one, the board members joined the call, each looking stunned, guarded, professionally alarmed. Then Jake appeared, no longer on my porch, but in his office beneath the framed magazine cover that once called him the man who reinvented medical data. His camera flickered on, and he looked directly at me, and everyone on that call finally understood that the woman they'd treated as a footnote was the only reason they still had a company left to save. The meeting opened without small talk. No one mentioned the weekend, the weather, nothing. Even the general counsel, who usually broke tension with an awkward joke, simply cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. Jake sat alone in the executive conference room, Manhattan's skyline glittering behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. His tie was gone, his top button undone. For a man who'd spent years mastering every public appearance, he suddenly looked remarkably ordinary. Martin sat beside me. Emma, he said quietly, answer only what you're asked. I nodded. The chairman adjusted his glasses. We've received notice, he began, that Carter Family Holdings has withdrawn its equity commitment and suspended all discretionary capital support, effective immediately. No one looked at Jake. Everyone looked at me. Mrs. Carter, can you confirm the notice is authentic? Yes. And that Carter Family Holdings remains the beneficial owner of 83% of Harlow Reed Technologies? Yes. The silence afterward seemed to stretch endlessly. Several directors had known the ownership structure existed on paper, but paperwork and reality are different animals. For years, Jake had become the public face of the company. Employees quoted him, investors photographed him, reporters called him the founder. Somewhere along the way, people had confused visibility with ownership. Jake had believed it most of all. He leaned toward his camera. "Emma, please don't make permanent decisions based on today's emotions." Martin's hand rested lightly on my legal pad, a silent reminder not to react. "I made no decisions today," I answered evenly. "I exercised rights that have existed for years." Jake closed his eyes. The chairman turned to him. "Jake, is there anything you need to disclose before we continue?" A long pause. "My personal situation has become complicated." "Complicated?" one director repeated flatly. Linda Foster, another board member, folded her hands on the table. "Did you represent yourself inside this company as unmarried?" Jake hesitated. "Yes." "Were you in fact married?" "Yes." "Did executive leadership know?" "No." The room went painfully still. No one cared that Jake had been unfaithful. They cared that their CEO had concealed material personal facts while conducting a highly visible relationship with another executive inside the same company. Corporate governance had just become a legal matter. General Counsel spoke next. "Given these disclosures, I recommend immediate administrative leave pending an independent investigation." Jake stared into the camera. "You can't be serious." The chairman sighed. "I wish we weren't." By 8:30 that night, the news hadn't reached the press, but inside Harlow Reed, everyone already knew. Corporate rumors move faster than any headline. Someone noticed Jake leaving the executive floor with a cardboard box. Someone else noticed Amanda's office door staying shut. Security quietly deactivated Jake's access card. A photo circulated through private employee group chats within minutes. Nothing went public. Not yet. The next morning I woke after barely 3 hours of sleep. Jake wasn't beside me for the first time in years. The silence felt strange, not lonely, just unfamiliar. I made coffee, fed our aging golden retriever, Murphy, and stood at the kitchen window watching kids wait for the school bus. Life outside continued exactly as it always had. That thought grounded me. My world had shattered. No one else's had. At 9:15, Martin arrived with 2 thick folders. "The banks have responded," he said. "I expected that. They've suspended acquisition financing. They're asking whether Carter Family Holdings intends to stay invested after restructuring." I glanced at the folders without opening them. "What did you tell them?" "The truth," he said, smiling faintly, "that the owner still believes in the company." That surprised me, and he noticed. "You never wanted to destroy Harlow Reed." "No, I wanted to stop one man from pretending he owned it." "Exactly. People always imagine revenge as burning everything down. Sometimes revenge just means refusing to let someone keep stealing credit for what you built." Around noon, my phone buzzed. Amanda Blake. I stared at her name for several seconds before answering. "Hello." Her voice sounded nothing like the composed CEO from board meetings, quieter, almost fragile. "I know I probably have no right to call you." "No," I said honestly. "You probably don't." She accepted that. "I didn't know." "I believe you." She exhaled sharply as if she'd been holding her breath all morning. "He told me he'd been separated for almost 2 years." "I know." "He said the divorce paperwork was delayed because of business assets." "I know." "He showed me an apartment lease." That made me pause. "What apartment?" Silence. Then, "He rented an apartment downtown." I stared at the wall. Jake had rented another apartment, not to live in, but to manufacture evidence of a lie. Every late meeting, every overnight strategy session, every business trip that ran too late to drive home, there had always been somewhere else. Not because he needed another life, but because he needed proof of one. "I feel sick," Amanda whispered. "You should." "I never would have." "I know." Her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." For the first time since Valentine's Day, I heard genuine remorse from someone connected to this disaster. "I believe you're sorry," I said, "but sorry doesn't undo what happened." "No." A pause. Will you ever forgive me? I looked out the window again. I don't know you well enough to forgive you. She didn't argue. She simply said quietly, "That's fair." Late that afternoon, Martin called again, his tone immediately catching my attention. "We found something." "What?" "Old authorization records." I drove to his office where he'd spread dozens of documents across the conference table, expense approvals, equity transfer forms, investment authorizations. At first glance, they looked routine. Then he pointed to several signatures. "They're yours." I frowned. "No, they're excellent copies." My stomach tightened. "I never signed these." "I know." He slid another document beside them. "Your authentic signature." The difference was obvious, tiny, almost invisible. But there. Jake hadn't just betrayed our marriage. Someone had been forging my signature on corporate documents for years. Martin folded his hands. "We're having forensic analysts review every executive authorization from the last 5 years. How many? Hundreds." I sat back slowly. Every emotion I'd carried since Valentine's Day shifted. Until that moment, I'd believed this story was about infidelity. Now it was becoming something far larger: corporate misconduct, fraud, potential criminal exposure. Martin studied me carefully. "Emma, you need to prepare yourself." "For what?" "If the investigation confirms what we suspect," he said, pausing, "Jake isn't just going to lose his marriage." I finished the sentence myself. "He's going to lose everything." Martin didn't answer. He didn't need to. The evidence spread across that table already had. Staring at the forged signatures bearing my name, I understood something far more chilling than the engagement party itself. Jake hadn't crossed one line. He'd been crossing lines for years. Valentine's Day hadn't caused the disaster, it had simply exposed it. The next 48 hours moved with the cold precision of machinery. Martin brought in a forensic accounting firm from New York, the kind that didn't ask unnecessary questions or reach for dramatic language unless a document truly warranted it. They set up in a locked conference room at Harlow Reed, badge access restricted, blinds drawn, laptops open beside banker boxes stuffed with old authorizations, board packets, wire approvals, and executive compensation files. I didn't go to the office. That was deliberate. If I walked in too soon, people would frame the investigation as a personal war between a wife and her husband. I wanted no gossip, no hallway whispers about revenge, no excuse for Jake to claim I was acting out of heartbreak instead of evidence. So I stayed home, funneled questions through Martin, and let professionals do what Jake had always underestimated. They followed the paper. By the third day, they found the pattern. It wasn't one forged signature or even a handful. It was a system. My name had authorized temporary executive loans, inflated travel reimbursements, fast-tracked vendor contracts tied to people Jake knew personally. None of it screamed fraud on first glance. That was what made it dangerous. It was polished, layered, wrapped in corporate language clean enough to slide past busy hands. But lies age badly. Every document carried a timestamp. Every approval carried metadata. Every transfer left a trail. At 6:12 Thursday evening, Martin called. "Emma," he said, "we have enough." I was standing in the laundry room, folding one of Jake's white dress shirts because habit is sometimes the last part of love to die. I looked down at the monogram on the cuff and suddenly felt foolish for touching it. "Enough for the board?" I asked. "Enough for the board, enough for civil action, possibly enough for referral to federal authorities." I closed my eyes. For a brief second, I wished the truth had been smaller. Then I remembered Jake kissing Amanda beneath that skylight while 200 people applauded a lie. "Then send it," I said. The emergency board meeting convened the next morning. This time Jake wasn't invited as chief executive. He was invited as the subject of the investigation. Amanda joined from her office, pale but composed. She temporarily resigned from all decisions connected to Jake, and the board had accepted. She didn't defend herself. She didn't blame me. When the chairman asked whether she'd known Jake was married, she answered plainly, "No, he told me he'd been separated for 2 years." And did he ever disclose that Mrs. Carter controlled the majority ownership of the company? Amanda looked down for a moment. "No. He told me his wife had no operational involvement, that the ownership structure was old family paperwork. The phrase landed heavily. Old family paperwork. That was what Jake had reduced my father's investment, my years of labor, and my silence to. Then the forensic accountants took over. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. They laid out signatures, metadata, wire approvals, lease agreements, executive expense records. They revealed the downtown apartment Jake had classified as a strategic client hospitality suite. Jewelry purchases labeled as investor relations gifts. Private travel booked through corporate accounts, weekends Amanda had believed were business retreats because Jake had surrounded every lie with just enough paperwork to make it look legitimate. Amanda covered her mouth once. Jake sat frozen. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded thin. This is being taken out of context. The lead investigator, Denise Lell, adjusted her glasses. Mr. Carter, metadata doesn't have context. It has timestamps. No one smiled, but I nearly did. Jake tried again. I had authority to act on behalf of the company. You had operational authority, Denise said. You did not have authority to forge Mrs. Carter's signature. His eyes cut to me, and for the first time there was anger beneath the fear. You're enjoying this, he said. I felt every face on the call turn toward me. I could have denied it. Instead, I told the truth carefully. No, Jake, I'm not enjoying this. I'm surviving it. That silenced him. By noon, the board voted unanimously to terminate Jake for cause, revoke all unvested equity, and refer the findings to outside counsel for civil recovery. His name would be stripped from every active company material until the matter was resolved. Amanda would remain on administrative leave pending her own ethics review, though preliminary findings showed she'd been deceived, not complicit. There was no shouting, no thrown glass. The revenge arrived in signatures, votes, and frozen accounts, and somehow that made it feel more complete. That afternoon, Amanda asked to meet in person. I nearly refused. Then I thought of her face learning about the apartment and realized there was one conversation left that Jake didn't get to control. We met at a small coffee shop in Fairfield, far from the office, far from anyone who might recognize us. Amanda arrived first, wearing little to no makeup, the diamond ring gone from her hand. When I sat across from her, she stood. I'm sorry, she said. You already said that. I know, but I needed to say it looking at you. I studied her face and found no arrogance, no victory, no trace of the woman accepting applause on that platform, just clean, brutal humiliation. I believed him, she said. That's not an excuse, it's just the truth. I know. He made me feel chosen. That sentence hurt more than I expected, because I understood it completely. Jake had always known how to make a woman feel like the room had rearranged itself around her. Amanda looked at her hands. When I saw you in the atrium, I thought you were an investor's wife, or someone from a charity board. I didn't know I was looking at the woman whose life I was standing inside. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then I said, he lied to both of us, Amanda, but he married me. His first duty was to me. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. I know. I could have hated her. Part of me wanted to. Hatred would have been easier than the uncomfortable truth that the other woman wasn't always a monster. Sometimes she was just another person standing in the wreckage, holding a different piece of the same lie. I won't protect you from consequences, I said. I'm not asking you to. But I won't punish you for what he did alone. Her eyes lifted to mine. That wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was justice. 3 nights later, Jake came back to the house. This time he didn't ring endlessly. He knocked once and waited. Through the window, I saw a man who looked nothing like the husband I'd brought flowers to on Valentine's Day. Coat wrinkled, face unshaven, confidence drained away, leaving him smaller, almost unfamiliar. I opened the door but left the chain fastened. He looked at the chain, then at me. I deserve that, he said. Yes. He swallowed. I lost the company. No, I said. You lost the illusion that it was yours. His eyes filled, but I didn't soften, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I'd spent too many years softening every hard truth until he could sidestep it. I'm not here to ask you to stop the investigation, he said. Good. I'm not here to ask you to take me back. Good. He nodded slowly, as if each word cost him something. I came to say I'm sorry. The old Emma would have reached for the door. The old Emma would have mistaken regret for repair. But the woman standing there had watched too much burn to confuse smoke with warmth. "Are you sorry because you hurt me?" I asked, "or because your life fell apart?" Jake looked down. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, "I don't know anymore." And that was the first honest thing he'd said since Valentine's Day. Jake lingered on the porch a moment longer, waiting for something that might make the future feel less frightening. I gave him nothing. The silence between us no longer belonged to resentment. It belonged to truth. Finally, he nodded. "I understand." I wasn't sure he did, but for the first time in a long time, understanding wasn't my responsibility anymore. I closed the door gently, not angrily, and watched through the sidelight as he walked back to his car. He didn't look back. His shoulders were slumped, hands buried in his coat pockets, moving like a man who'd spent years climbing toward a summit, only to realize he'd been following the wrong map. Murphy wandered into the foyer and rested his head against my leg. I scratched behind his ears and whispered, "I think we're going to be okay." For the first time since Valentine's Day, I believed it. The divorce took months. Real ones usually do. Financial disclosures, property evaluations, depositions, more paperwork than either of us thought possible. Because of the prenuptial agreement and an ownership structure that predated our marriage, the legal process itself was surprisingly straightforward. Emotionally, nothing about it felt simple. Jake never contested my ownership of Harlow Reed. He couldn't. The documents had existed for years, and the investigation had erased any illusion that the company belonged to anyone but me. The civil claims tied to the forged signatures moved forward through separate counsel, eventually resolved through negotiated settlements, restitution, and a permanent ban on Jake serving as an officer of any company under the relevant agreements. Painful for him, certainly, but the consequence of choices made repeatedly over years, not of a single terrible afternoon. Justice, I learned, rarely arrives all at once. It comes in carefully numbered pages. Amanda completed her ethics review. Investigators found no evidence she'd participated in the forged documents or profited from the misconduct. Her greatest failure had been believing the man she loved. The board reinstated her as CEO 6 weeks later. Before accepting, she called me. "I won't take the position if you think I shouldn't." I appreciated the question more than she probably realized. "You earned the job," I said. "But because of everything," I interrupted gently, "don't waste the chance to do it honestly." She was quiet. "I don't expect us to become friends. I don't either. But I hope one day you'll believe I never wanted your life." I looked out at the first signs of spring pushing through the frozen flower beds. I already believed that. When we hung up, I realized forgiveness had arrived without announcing itself, not the complete kind that erases scars, just enough to stop carrying someone else's guilt. The board asked if I wanted to become CEO. Years earlier, I might have accepted without hesitation. Instead, I surprised even myself. "No," the chairman blinked. "You built this company." "Yes." "You own it." "Yes." "Then why not?" I smiled. "Because ownership and purpose aren't always the same thing." I accepted the role of executive chair instead, focusing on long-term strategy and leaving daily operations to Amanda, the arrangement I should have chosen years earlier. Not because I lacked the ability to lead publicly, but because leadership works best when it reflects who you actually are, not who everyone else expects you to become. For the first time in years, the company felt honest. 3 months after Valentine's Day, I found the Paris envelope tucked in a desk drawer. The flights had long since been canceled, the hotel reservation gone, but the handwritten card I'd written for Jake was still folded inside. I read it once, smiled sadly, and fed it through the shredder, not out of anger, but acceptance. That evening, I opened my laptop and booked another trip. Same city, different hotel, one ticket. Paris greeted me with warm sunshine and cafes spilling onto narrow sidewalks. I wandered without an itinerary, lingered in bookstores where I understood only half the language, sat beside the Seine with coffee that grew cold because I kept watching people instead of drinking it. On my second evening, I crossed the Pont des Arts just as the sky turned gold. Years earlier, Jake and I had stood there making promises about the future. This time, I made only one promise to myself: never confuse being needed with being valued. They are not the same thing. Nearly a year later, Harlow Reed announced a new investment initiative supporting early-stage healthcare technology companies, founded by women and underrepresented entrepreneurs. The idea had sat in one of my notebooks for almost a decade. Now we'd finally built it. At the launch, Amanda introduced the program, thanked the board, thanked our employees, and then, unexpectedly, thanked me. "Some people build companies," she said. "Others build cultures where truth eventually matters more than appearances. We're here because Emma Carter refused to sacrifice either." The applause that followed sounded nothing like the applause I'd heard on Valentine's Day. That applause had celebrated illusion. This one honored integrity. The difference mattered. A few weeks later, I received a handwritten letter, not an email, not a text, from Jake. He wrote that he'd taken a management position at a small regional software company in Vermont. Nothing glamorous, no magazine interviews, no keynote speeches, no corner office. Every morning, he unlocked the office himself, made coffee for the staff, and left each evening knowing exactly what his title meant: employee. He apologized again, not for losing the company, not for losing his reputation, but for years spent believing success entitled him to ignore the promises he'd made to the people who loved him most. At the bottom of the page, one final line: "I hope one day I become someone worthy of the forgiveness I asked for." I folded the letter and placed it in a box with old photographs, not to relive the past, but because pretending it never happened would teach me nothing. Some chapters deserve to stay closed. They don't deserve to be erased. People sometimes ask whether revenge brought me peace. Honestly, no. Revenge gave me justice. Peace came later, the day I stopped measuring my future by someone else's betrayal. Jake lost his marriage because he chose deception over honesty. He lost his career because he chose ambition over integrity. He lost the company because he forgot that borrowed power is never the same as earned trust. As for me, I didn't win because he lost. I won because I finally remembered that my worth had never depended on someone else recognizing it. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's refusing to let their choices destroy the person you were always meant to become. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in Emma's place? Would you have made the same choices or taken a different path? Share your perspective in the comments, and if you enjoy thoughtful stories about betrayal, justice, resilience, and second chances, consider subscribing and joining us for the next journey.